Happy Pride, everybody. Welcome. This is Designing an LGBTQ plus inclusive corporate travel program presented by FCM. My name is Emma Graham. My pronouns are she, her, and I'm the Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Manager at Flight Center Travel Group and FCM. I'm dialing in today from Treaty 13A territory, which is found in the traditional lands of the Mississaugas of the Credit First Nation. Just a couple of housekeeping notes as people are still coming in before we get started. This webinar is recorded and we'll be sharing it live on YouTube on our channel in the coming days. The YouTube version will have captions available in English and Spanish. If you'd like to turn on closed captioning for today's live session, you can do that in the closed captioning meeting control in your Zoom panel. As we're having our discussion today, please feel free to submit any questions in the Q&A icon at the bottom of your Zoom screen. We won't be able to address every single question live today, but we'll do our best to get as many as we can. And then afterwards, all of the panelists will be responding to the questions that we weren't able to get to in a follow-up blog that we'll be posting on FCM's website and sharing across our social channels as well after that. So keep an eye out for that. Today, I'm delighted to welcome two very special guests with us. First, we have Stone Conroy from United Airlines. Stone, thank you so much for being here.
Thank you so much for having me.
I'd love to hear just really quickly a little bit about your journey with LGBTQ plus inclusion.
Yeah, so again, my name is Stone Conroy. My pronouns are he, him, and I manage the geopolitical intelligence and analysis team here at United Airlines based in Chicago, Illinois. And I think this topic that we're discussing today is really important for a couple of reasons. I'll start with the professional one. It's my job here at United Airlines to inform our employees about what's happening around the world from a security standpoint. And we fly to over 200 destinations here in the US and over 120 internationally. And the reality is that every traveler has a different risk profile based on who they are. And it's important to think about that and to understand that the different risk profiles will affect how comfortable someone is traveling around the world. So that's the professional reason why I think this conversation is really important, because it's my job to think about these things. But I think personally, you know, what's happening around the world and here in the US is illustrative of the challenges that face members of this community from a safety and security standpoint. And in personal conversations with friends of mine who are part of the LGBTQ plus community, I think it's more important now than ever to really focus on how allies especially can help make the world a safer place for people to exist and feel free from discrimination and fear of rights and freedoms being taken away. So this is an especially important Pride Month to have this conversation because these issues are more relevant now than they ever have been before.
Thank you so much, Stone. Happy to have you here with us. Also joining us today is a special guest, Ruben von Skalkvik from Aon. Ruben, thank you so much for being here today. I'd love to tell a bit about yourself and your journey with LGBTQ plus inclusion.
Thanks, Imishi, and thumbs up for getting my surname spot on. Well done. So you've all heard Imishi pronounce my name and surname exactly as it should be. My pronouns are he, him, his. I am the regional security manager for Aon in the Europe, Middle East, and Africa regions. Although I have a South African accent because I was born there, I live in London and have done for the last 20 years. This topic is important to me from a professional standpoint because at work I'm responsible for giving all travelers travel advice if they're going to high-risk destinations, and as part of that, I've given LGBTQ plus travelers specific training on traveling to all sorts of destinations. On a personal front, as a gay male, I have had some close shaves in my youth, and it is, you know, it's important for me to share this stuff now so that people can learn from the blunders I have made in the past rather than making them themselves. I cast my mind way back to when I was 26. I had a new boyfriend. It was all very exciting, and we were going to travel from the UK to Egypt, to Sharm el Sheikh, for a diving vacation. Very excited. It was a long time ago when I was 26, so we were traveling by airship, Zeppelin. Not really, but we were flying there, and I had done absolutely no homework. My friends had been, gay friends had been, and they'd said that, you know, it's fantastic, the diving is great, the people are wonderful. And so off we went, landed, no problem, got to the resort. And at check-in, I booked a double room. And when I checked in, they asked me whether I still wanted a double room and who was with me. And I was like, oh, I'm here with this guy. And the check-in clerk at the desk was like, okay, so you want a twin room? And I said, no, I want a double room. And he said, I think you want a twin room. And we stood there toing and froing for a bit, and eventually they put me into a twin room with two double beds. And it was only afterwards that I found out that in Egypt, it's illegal to be gay. And so I could have actually gotten into, you know, significant trouble if it wasn't for the fact that the check-in clerk was a kind man who, you know, took pity on this fool who hadn't done his homework before he went. So, you know, that's my message to all of the LGBTQ plus folks who are on the call, is it's really important to know before you go.
Absolutely. So I'd like to kick off our conversation just by thinking about like setting the context, like why we're having this discussion today in particular. I mean, I'll start by saying that we have such a growing understanding of just how big the LGBTQ plus community actually is. Like we're talking somewhere between 7 and 10% of business travelers, you know, 20 million Americans and 1 million Canadians, for example. And, you know, yes, there's still homophobia and transphobia that's very much present, you know, across North America, but I think it's encouraging to see that more people seem to be finding community and finding the language that they can connect with and identify with, and, you know, support that you're able to be open about your gender and sexuality. And so it's a really beautiful time to be celebrating, you know, the diversity of all that human experience. And it's also the right time for corporate traveler professionals to be considering especially the LGBTQ plus community and their unique needs as they travel. So Stone, would you like to share too, like just also why now? Why is it important to be having this conversation right now?
Yeah, well, I think you made a couple of really good points, and I just want to throw out a couple of statistics from surveys about LGBTQ plus travelers, some of which may be familiar to folks and some of which may not be, but I'll start with a recent survey that was done by the Business Travel Show in Europe of over 200 European travel managers that found that 66% of travel programs do not give any particular consideration to the LGBTQ plus community. And this is really important because most people, when they're surveyed about considerations that they take when they're traveling, look to personal safety as the biggest stress point. So people who are traveling, especially internationally, are thinking about personal safety a lot. And we have a huge segment of the traveling population, as you know, that is not being as well served as they could be. I'd also like to point out another statistic about the fact that LGBTQ plus travelers, the vast majority, 95%, according to another survey, have said that they have hidden their sexual orientation or some other aspect of their identity while on a business trip. And the most common reason that they gave is to protect their safety. And 85% of travelers have changed their travel arrangements because of this issue, compared to 53% of non-LGBTQ plus colleagues. This is clearly a really huge issue that is not being as addressed as well as it could be. And this is something that professionally, I think, especially if you work in a role like mine, where you're looking at travel risk management on behalf of a corporation, is a really important time to be looking at how you can change your programs. Because for those who are not aware, there was a recent standard that was put into place, an international standard for travel risk management, that companies across the world are now looking at for the first time and trying to figure out, okay, how does my program fit into the mix? Where am I missing out? How can I improve my program? And it's a good time, if you're already going through this process of meeting this new international standard for travel risk management, to think specifically about the LGBTQ plus community and to figure out how you can incorporate special considerations for this community into your program. And then, of course, we've got a couple days left of Pride Month. So if you're going to look at this and start to revamp your travel risk management program, this is exactly the time to do it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, thank you, Stone. Ruben, what's your perspective on why now?
Well, because we haven't really traveled for a good long while. So a lot of us are quite rusty. I traveled to the US on the weekend for Pride in New York. And I was so focused on, do I need a vaccine? Do I need proof of vaccine? Do I need a mask? What do I need to get there? That I'd sort of forgotten that as a British national, I still need an ESTA visa to be able to travel to the country, because this was just for private travel. So I remembered in time and got it all sorted out because I was there and I came back. But I'm a seasoned traveler and I forgot that. So I think for a lot of people who haven't traveled in a long time, this is we need to just shake off some of that rust and just get sharp again on what we need to pack and how and when. So yeah, I think that's a good reason. I also think, geopolitically, the landscape keeps changing, and with many companies now having, very diverse workforces, companies have a responsibility to have these policies and these plans in place to protect their employees.
Mm-hmm, absolutely. Yeah. I mean, number one, yeah, it's Pride Month. Like, let's make sure these issues are in the spotlight. Now's the time for sure. And like as both of you said, like, we're in a season where duty of care is so essential. People are really taking a look at making sure, like, a lot has changed. There's a lot we need to be up to date on. Let's make sure that people are well informed. And if we put things into perspective too, and just look at the larger context of LGBTQ rights, like right now, there are 69 countries that still outlaw homosexuality, punishments ranging from fines to even imprisonment, and in extreme cases, death. So, and in the countries that are more progressive, like, there could still be a lot of gaps for protections for rights of LGBTQ plus people. So what are some like specific things that travelers need to be keeping in mind when they're away from home, especially if it's been a while, whether that's just a business trip that's just a few hours away, or if they're going somewhere a little bit more far flung? Ruben, would you share first?
Well, I think even before you get to the point where you're booking your ticket, it is really important that you before you go, if that makes sense. There is so much homework that you can do that is going to just help the whole travel scenario be as pleasurable as it can be, and to go off without any hitches. So for me, there's as a UK citizen, I can always go to the Home Office website and check to see what's going on in the destination that I'm going to, and they generally capture quite a lot of like broad-ranging things, from are there specific outbreaks of diseases there, all the way through to, homosexuality is outlawed, or and this is where it's sometimes helpful to do a little bit more digging. You mentioned that statistic about the 69 countries that and their legal standpoint, I think it's important to bear in mind that swings both ways. So you might have legal protection in a country where culturally you don't have great acceptance, or the other way around, where a country might be more accepting even though things are illegal. So it's really important that you go and just do your homework before you buy your ticket. Yeah, I think those are the big things for me.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Stone, what do you think? And especially like if you can think of resources that travelers should be aware of too before they go.
Sure. So I'll underscore, and especially from the perspective of someone working at a large corporation and doing travel risk management, that pre-travel advice and awareness is really huge. And that's something that if you're in a role like mine, you should be helping employees with that. But as Ruben mentioned, you need to know before you go. So a lot of that work is on the employee or the individual as well to educate themselves about what situation they're heading into, as well as developing contingency plans, emergency contact lists, some sort of incident management framework. All of these can play into travel risk management for anyone going overseas. And as far as specific resources, there are actually a lot out there, both on the government side and from various nonprofit institutions and from academic institutions. So I'll touch on a few of those. Coming from my perspective, being here in the US, the first place I always go for travel advice of any sort, security or not, is the State Department. So if you're not already familiar with travel.state.gov, it's a great place to learn about destinations around the world. And they actually have a specific page for LGBTQ plus travel information. So you can go there and learn about specific considerations and also places around the world that have different laws and cultural practices that you may need to take into account. Another place is, again, a State Department resource, but it's specific to the Overseas Security Advisory Council, OSAC, a place where I used to work actually at the State Department. And they have a report on supporting LGBTQ plus employees abroad from a security standpoint. So if you're looking for specific security and safety advice, they've got a great report. You can also look at foreign governments, other governments' websites. I know the Canadian government does a really good job of outlining all the considerations for members of this community as they travel under their travel advice and advisories page. They have a whole section on what they call sexual orientation, gender identity, gender expression, and sex characteristics. And they outline all the different things you may need to think about, including traveling with children, different visa considerations, all sorts of things across the board that you may need to consider as you're traveling overseas. And then there's actually a lot of open source information that's available from academic institutions. So if you want to look this up, it's freely available online. Harvard University has a really good LGBTQ plus travel guidance and resources page that you can download for free. There are also learning modules for LGBTQ plus travel that are available from a variety of companies out there. There's a free resource for developing a travel risk management strategy specifically for transgendered workers. So that's employees who are traveling overseas. So a whole host of available resources that are out there, and I'm happy to follow up with anyone if they want more. We here at United use International SOS, which has both an online portal and an assistance app, and that as well has a dedicated section for LGBTQ plus travelers about cultures, customs, and security and safety considerations as you travel around the world. And I'd like to mention a couple other things really quickly, things that you may not be considering as you travel overseas, but again, are helpful to note. So for instance, if you're within the United States or Europe, there is a couple of different applications, phone applications that will let you know where restrooms are located that may be gender neutral. So Refuge Restroom app is a really good application, and they also have an online portal as well. There's information out there about different medications that you could be using and the ways in which you could travel internationally and still take those medications with you and be safe in a place where declaring what medications you have is actually a requirement for entering the country. So tons of resources out there. And as I mentioned, I'm happy to follow up with anyone and provide a full list of the freely available resources that are out there for members of this community as they travel overseas.
That's fantastic. So thank you so much. So many great resources that people can tap into. I want to shift the conversation a little bit to some significant change that's happening in the industry right now that's improving inclusion for gender expansive travelers. Of course, recently, the US just joined Canada and a couple of other countries as well, where they're now issuing X gender markers on passports, which is a fantastic step in the right direction for like trans and non-binary, two-spirit, agender, gender fluid, and other gender expansive people. So now there's a lot of collaboration that is happening and needs to keep happening in the industry to make it easier for people who are using those types of travel documents as they're booking, as they're just getting around. So I know from just the corporate travel management side of things, for example, FCM's team is working behind the scenes on the tech side, looking at, updating legacy systems, making sure that we have gender neutral options for people who need them. And then also so that we have a really clear roadmap for travelers who are booking either with a supplier who's ready to and equipped to accept X gender markers in their systems, or they're booking with a supplier that's in the process of making that update and that kind of thing. And on, of course, the expertise side, being able to support travelers and provide information to help them to navigate those systems and make the decisions that are right for them. Not to mention just like the education piece, right? Making sure, that the environment that we're creating for travelers is welcoming, it's inclusive. We're, avoiding microaggressions or misgendering people, and, helping people to understand, how to respect people's personal pronouns. We just recently published a blog on our FCM website. Actually, if you haven't seen it, I encourage you to go check it out. It just addresses, the importance of personal pronouns and how respecting those really connects to knowing how to handle gender neutral travel documents. But really my point is that there's a lot of work that is happening behind the scenes in the industry and a lot of collaboration to make it so that gender expansive travelers can have a really positive booking experience. Stone, could you speak a little bit to what airlines can do and what their role is in this process?
Sure. So thanks for teeing that up. It is an enormous effort that airlines and airports and various governments around the world have been undertaking now for several years. So we here at United are really proud that we're the first major US carrier to offer a non-binary option for passenger bookings back in 2019. So we've had this in place internally for a few years now, but the rest of the world is still trying to figure out how to change legacy systems to include a non-binary option for booking travel. And as you mentioned, this is something that you can do domestically and have a non-binary option, but when you travel internationally, it brings in a whole host of other issues related to passport considerations. And as of April this year, if you are a U.S. citizen, you can now mark X as a gender marker on your U.S. passport application. So that is a relatively new process that airlines are trying to figure out how do we work with the U.S. State Department on this and the broader U.S. government, and then how do we work with the Transportation Security Administration as well, and how do these government entities, including the U.S. and the Canadian government, work with other governments around the world and international aviation bodies to spread this as much as we can to other countries, and again, work with these systems that are in place to update them for this new option. So it's an ongoing process. In late 2023, the State Department is going to begin offering an X gender marker on consular reports of birth abroad for U.S. citizens. So it's part of a broader initiative, at least within the U.S. State Department, to include as many different options as possible for folks in the facilitation and consular process. And there's really good information about this on the U.S. State Department Bureau of Consular Affairs. that talks about gender designation changes, name changes, everything that you could need to know from a US perspective. And for those of you who are worried about traveling, there's actually a new guidance or new-ish guidance document from the Transportation Security Administration about transgender passengers and what they should know as they're going through the process. And there's also a really good guide from the National Center for Transgender Equality as well about airport security, TSA procedures, and what to expect when you're going through that process. So I guess I'll say that it is this sort of patchwork process at the moment, and it's going to take a bit more time for all the governments and airlines around the world to update their systems. We're really happy to be leading the charge here at United. And for those who want to follow up with more specifics about when certain things are going to roll out and more information about how they can book on United or on another airline and have that gender expression ability, please, again, feel free to reach out to me and I can follow up with more information.
Mm-hmm. Thank you, Stone. Now, Ruben, Stone touched a little bit on like the airport experience, and I'd love to hear your perspective on that a little bit more, and like what airports' roles are in the, creating a more gender inclusive option.
Well, it's difficult, I think, for airports. We've, because by their nature they're all over the place, all different countries, different cultures, and from a security perspective, there are people at the airports who have a vested interest in making certain that you are who you say you are, and so they will take a very deep look, sometimes an invasive look, depending on who you are. And depending on what it says on your passport. So I think for trans travelers, there is definitely some development to be done in terms of, on a global scale, for all airports and all of the security functions that they have there to be prepared and to be as accepting as they can be. I know from personal conversations that I've had with trans friends that going to the airport is probably the most horrific part of traveling, because there is this unfortunate requirement for people to be scrutinized. And there is often a lack of training or, compassion, because you're processing so many people as a person who's working on the security side of things. If you're not prepared, if you've not had the training, this is for a lot of people, this is unfortunately still a new thing. So if there are, trans travelers who are on the call or trans travelers who are seeing this later on, then it's important that you're prepared for which country you're going to, for what it is that you might be experiencing at the airport. Things change so quickly, and you run into so many different things. This weekend, I was really surprised as I was coming back to the UK through Newark. I didn't have to take any of my electronics or fluids out of my bag that went into the hold, because the machine that I was being scanned by didn't need for those things to be taken out, but the two other channels were. So the things change really quickly. It's important that people know before they go, and that our trans friends who are traveling are prepared for what they might be experiencing at the airport, and also to be prepared for how they're going to react. If you're going to a more conservative country and you get misgendered, which unfortunately still happens, you should be prepared for that, and you should be prepared for whether or not this is the time for you to make a stand, and whether that could lead to you getting into further trouble, or whether this is something that on this occasion you you can let slide because there are other things that are more important, you know, on the trip that you are on. I was on a flight to a North African country once, and I think the lady who was on the plane was a nervous flyer, but she was really drinking quite hard at the airport already, and I think she was just completely unprepared for the situation that she was landing in, because she was very vocal with the airport staff on the other end, and they had actually taken her passport, and instead of de-escalating the situation, she was just escalating and becoming more and more aggressive with these people who, because she was a woman, you know, didn't have the same sort of respect that they would have for a man because of the destination that you went to. And this is it's just another example of knowing what you're flying into and being prepared for the attitudes that you're going to run in on the other side, and then managing your risk, to use the business language.
Yeah, it's actually a good segue into thinking about just travel emergencies in general. Like, how do people prepare for, like, what if something goes wrong? Because there are unique considerations that LGBTQ plus travelers have that other people don't necessarily have to think about. Do you want to speak to that first, Ruben?
Yeah. So as someone who deals with this quite often, I don't think it's what if. I think it's when it goes wrong, because it inevitably does go wrong. I've said this about 27 times. You need to have a plan, and you need to know what you're going to do before you go. I have a very good anecdote on this. Friends of mine went to a sub-Saharan African country. They were going to on a very nice safari, and it was a group of middle-aged lesbians, and one of the group identifies as non-binary, and can sometimes present as quite more male than female. And while they were there, their camera was stolen, and so for insurance purposes they decided to go to the police and to report this. And what they ran into was a lot of very deep probing questions from a police force who were now taking interest in them because they were a bunch of middle-aged ladies traveling together with no mans, and all presenting in a not as feminine way as the clearly bigoted man who was dealing with them would have liked. And so what was supposed to be a routine, we'll report this to the police and then claim on our insurance for the camera, turned into a much more sinister, invasive questioning about who they were and what they were doing there and why they were traveling together and where their husbands were. And so, when we talked about this, and we had a deeper discussion, my question was, in hindsight, was it really worth reporting the loss of this camera to the police for you to be able to claim it on your insurance? Because it left quite a stain on what was, generally quite a pleasant experience for them. But now it's always going to be that time that we nearly got into trouble in while we were traveling in Africa, because of who we are. So I think it's important to have a backup plan. I think it's important to think, do I need to take my most expensive watch? Do I need to take my nice things on safari, is it maybe worthwhile taking other things that if I do lose them, it's less of a hit, and you know, generally speaking, just having a good backup plan, know where your embassy is, so that if something goes wrong, you can go there. Have a digital copy of your passport in your email that you can access if you've lost your phone. So can you get to it online? Have a credit card in your room rather than with you on your person, so that if something happens to your wallet or your purse, you know, you can still access funds, so it isn't a car crash if something gets stolen. And speaking of car crashes, 80% of travel incidents happen while traveling to and from destinations. So these are road traffic accidents while you're in the car, coming or going from airports or the hotel. If you're going to a place that you've never been to before, and there is a load of traveling, you know, in cars or in vehicles rather than on public transport, do you have a plan? Do you know what you're going to do? Does Uber work in the country? Or is this a reputable service that you've booked your transfers through? Is it through the hotel? Is someone going to come and get you? It's really important that you do these things before you go, because the last thing you want is to be in a foreign country where people may or may not speak your language, and then getting stuck by the roadside with no plans.
Yeah, exactly. That's an excellent point. And it very much ties into just lots and lots of research and thinking about those, you know, things that you don't want to happen, but could, right? Stone, could you speak a little bit more about that type of like preparation and like what kinds of contingency planning, you know, goes into thinking about travel emergencies?
Yeah, so I think this is another example where there is a difference between if you're traveling on your own versus traveling for business on behalf of your organization, because another thing that you should be asking your organization if you're traveling for work is, you know, what does the organization have planned in case something happens during my trip? And I think oftentimes people, if something happens, and that example is a great one, they default to reaching out to the police or the local security services if there's been some sort of an incident. And the unfortunate reality for many members of the LGBTQ plus community is that the police in many countries around the world are often not perhaps your best friend and not the place where you want to go right away. So when you are coming up with these plans, make sure that travelers understand that the first contact that you may want to have is with your local consulate or embassy, or with your travel risk manager back at headquarters if this is a work emergency, and perhaps not the police, because you could take what is a fairly benign situation and make it worse by involving the police in those situations. So again, this is very nuanced, and it's depending on the location and the travel risk profile. But that's something I think to keep in mind. So if you are a traveler in this community, and again, you're traveling on behalf of your organization, ask your organization what they have planned for you, because there is an expectation there that there is sort of a contingency plan or some other option to help you out of given situations that you might find yourself in.
Yeah, thank you. I think, that was a real proper thing. Go ahead.
That was my hand that flew up. I also think if you are the manager of an LGBTQ plus colleague or employee, I think it's important to be prepared just as much as, you know, when it comes to sending someone on work travel. I think that it's really important that managers understand what situations they're potentially asking their employees to go into, and to be prepared for whether or not, you know, a colleague wants to or doesn't want to go to this location. I would stress that in my opinion, it's always the employee's decision to make whether they want to take that risk or not. But certainly, I think that, you know, as a manager who is aware that they have an LGBTQ plus employee, they have a responsibility to be prepared to, you know, deal with the specific challenges that, or the specific risks rather, that these colleagues will be exposed to.
Mm-hmm. And actually, to add to that point too, I think it's best if there's a layer of LGBTQ plus considerations, even if, you know, the people that you're working with aren't out, you know, you can't just assume that everybody's cisgender and straight. So giving people as much information as possible, just so that everyone has it and everyone can be prepared, that's the safest way to go. I think we do have time for a couple of questions. I'm just going to pull up the first one here. It says, I want to check if my travel program is safe for LGBTQ plus travelers. How do I start? Stone, you want to take a crack at that one first?
Yeah, sure. So I mentioned some resources before, but if you're looking for maybe one place to start, I would point to International SOS's freely available publication called The 6 Steps to Support Your LGBTQ plus Travelers. So again, you're looking for just a baseline where to start. They have taken all of the information out there and kind of laid it out in these 6 steps to make sure that your travelers are as safe as they can be. And if you start there, it's a really good place to launch off from, and then start building in other components to your program. But I would say that's a good place to sort of benchmark whether or not what you have already is lining up with the best practices that are out there.
Awesome. I think another thing that you could certainly consider is if you have a business resource group, so a support group, a forum for your LGBTQ plus colleagues or employees in the office, then if you are getting to a point where you've put together a framework and you filled it in, you can start running it past them, because they'll be able to give you guidance on, you know, their feelings on the language, or whether they feel that there are things missing. It can be quite a nuanced thing. So having that input from people who are, you know, if they're already in your resource group, then they're going to be open to guiding you to putting the best piece of work together and the best piece of work out there. I think that is a very, very good place to get feedback from.
Mm-hmm. It's a whole principle of nothing about us without us, right? Like the best way is to incorporate the community that you're trying to serve, because those lived experiences are the best knowledge that you can have and gather. So, okay, there's another question here that says, sorry, I'm scrolling past it. LGBTQ plus people have always been members of the business traveler community. Why is this conversation more important now? Ruben, do you want to start with this one?
I think the most important thing outside of, you know, the reason why we're here is that it's Pride Month and we're shining a light on this, is because the landscape continues to change so quickly, and not always in a more inclusive way. Countries' laws change constantly. It's important for businesses to understand what they're asking people to do, and it's important for them to be, or, you know, if you do ask someone to do something, that they are afforded, you know, every security that they could have, so that they're doing what they're doing safely.
Mm-hmm. I wanted to add too, just like, everybody needs to be involved. I feel like if you haven't started to you know, think about your role in addressing homophobia and transphobia, like, today is better than never, right? And really, like, these are systemic issues that really go from, you know, just the internalized piece all the way to like legislation and organizational practices and cultural norms. So it really needs to be addressed in like every way possible by like people from all walks of life and all different roles in the industry too. So to me, it's like it's better now than never, honestly. And we
Yeah.
just need as many people as possible to join in and help to get rid of the discrimination that exists.
If there are any allies who are managers on the call, my manager at Aon, you know, as part of my job, I am supposed to go to all sorts of places, and there was an opportunity to go to Russia a few years ago, and we had a very open discussion, which he led, on whether or not I wanted to go there because of the attitude towards homosexuality, and I was asked and consulted with on whether I wanted to go or not, which I didn't want to do from a moral standpoint. So having that at work, having someone who wanted me to do well and wanted to have that conversation with me, and was open to having a conversation which might have been tricky, I think that was awesome, and that's really, for me, for, you know, in a world where people move from company to company quite often, I think that this has really sort of solidified why I want to stay at Aon, because the culture that has been shown to me is very inclusive and caring to me. So if there are managers on here, then please be prepared to have those conversations, and don't be worried about taking the lead. Just be open to what's going to happen.
Mm-hmm. There's a question here that's actually very closely related to it. So I'm going to choose that as the last question that we'll answer like live today. And it's, I'm a travel manager and I want to make sure I'm treating my LGBTQ plus travelers with respect. How do I handle their concerns about traveling empathetically and professionally? Stone, do you want to share your perspective on this?
Yeah, you know, I think Ruben mentioned this, and you mentioned it as well, that it's really important to reach out to your business resource groups and to talk with people whose experiences you may not share. So I'm a cisgendered straight white man. I don't know personally what it feels like to be discriminated against in the way that someone does who's not part of, you know, my identity profile. So if I'm going to be empathetic about these situations, I need to learn from people. And that's on me to do that, because I'm in a position where I'm advising people about travel all around the world. So it's incumbent on people, and again, we mentioned this so many times now, incumbent on managers, incumbent on people who do travel risk for their organizations to go out and do the work and learn what you don't know about members of different identity groups, to find out what it does feel like to do that. And if you have a business resource group like we do, we have a group called Equal here at United Airlines, be a part of that, and learn from people and understand where they're coming from and what their fears are and what their concerns are as they're traveling around the world. So I would say just, you know, simply listen, talk to as many people as possible and listen to what they say.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. The thing about building an inclusive travel program is that there's a lot to think about, right? Like there's a lot of diversity, even just within the LGBTQ plus community, thinking about, you know, all the different factors that your sexuality and your gender identity and your gender expression and like how people perceive you, you know, how that can really impact the different ways that you navigate public spaces, the different ways that you are traveling and planning and thinking about things. But also it's really just a broader conversation about different types of intersectionalities, like not just, you know, gender and sexuality, but also, you know, the lens of racial equity, the lens of disability inclusion and accessibility, generational considerations, right? And your age and stuff, and the cultural, you know, background that you have as well. So really the conversations that we're having now is best served when it's part of a really holistic approach to equity and inclusion and diversity. And I mean, I'll share a little bit about what we've been doing at FCM and Flight Center Travel Group, and that's just a really big focus on that education piece, right? And building up our cultural competency and our equity literacy so that we can be an inclusive and welcoming place to work, and we can create, you know, a service experience that's welcoming and inclusive as well. We've gone through this like a benchmarking process to help us assess where our gaps are, like in terms of LGBTQ plus inclusion, in terms of racial equity and gender equity and all of these things, because it's really about, you know, being proactive and really intentional about paying attention to all of these different types of identities and how they affect people's experiences. So that would be my tip really for having conversations and plans when it comes to building an inclusive travel policy, is to really think about all these different layers and how they impact people differently. So Ruben and Stone, thank you so much for sharing your time with us today. It's been such a pleasure having this important conversation with you. Just a reminder that this recording will be shared on YouTube, along with a recap blog that will address some of the questions that we weren't able to respond to live. And thank you everybody for tuning into today's webinar, for asking questions and thinking about, you know, how you can bring these takeaways back to your teams. From myself and from the FCM team, thank you so much everybody, and happy Pride.